I hope you all had a great Easter week. And sometimes it's hard to come up with things to say and make videos about because everything has become so obvious. Absolutely everybody sees it, and all the things that people have been warning about are now coming true anyway. But there's one thing that they're still pushing that hasn't quite come to fruition that we can all choose to collectively laugh at and ignore. And that's things like this. Have you seen it? New climate report as of April 4th. It's now or never to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So if we do nothing, does that mean we get to stop hearing about this for good? So there was a new flagship report Monday that indicated harmful carbon emissions from 2010 to 2019 have never been higher. And that it is now or never if we're going to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Got that? This is the last time. Not global cooling as we saw in the 70s, not a flooded New York as we saw in the 80s, not the North American continent underwater as we saw in the 90s, not all the catastrophes predicted in the 2000s and 2010s, not the glaciers in Glacier National Park that are going to be gone by 2020 but are now bigger than ever. Nope, this is the time. You can forget all those. It's always year zero. It's this year. It's this time. So good. I'm glad we're finally there. And here we can see sea levels are already posing a threat to California coast. A study raises new alarms. And that's interesting because I know a lot of people that live on the coast here in Western Washington. Nothing's changing. The Obamas live 6 inches above sea level. They don't seem to have an emergency plan for rising sea level. But here we at least finally have confirmation. The ocean's rising in California, not those other places, just there. So we're getting 1 foot of sea rise here by 2050. I wonder if that's the tide coming in. So there's the usual fear stuff, and it's a wake-up call for the United States. I wonder if the insurance agencies are charging more for people that live on the coastline due to this. Are we seeing that? Yeah, no, I don't think we are. Boy, those companies that are great at making a profit are going to be in trouble over the next 30 years. They warn daily overland flooding from 1 foot of sea level rise equates to about $15 billion worth of properties at risk and would affect about 38,000 people. Daily emergence of groundwater. Oh man, water just shooting up from the ground. Could expose an additional 350,000 people and $100 billion worth of properties. So just keep this prediction in mind. We're going to have massive flooding coming from the coast and also water bubbling up out of the ground and destroying a ton of property. Just remember this one for the next panic. And all this caused because the NOAA found last year that the planet's average land-ocean surface temperature was 1.51 degrees higher than the 20th century average. The Earth is 1.51 degrees warmer. Terrifying. And in fact, USA Today warns us, people are dying already. Global warming already being seen, a UN report finds. And I read through this entire article, and you know what it didn't have any examples of? People that are dying already. Just more of the usual fear-mongering and native people in the Maldives or whatever, small islands are being swallowed up by the ocean, and yet they're still there. So, okay. I don't know who these articles still fool, but they still fool somebody. And here you can see there was a study at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Worst-case climate predictions are no longer plausible. The world is unlikely to reach the worst-case scenario of climate change by the end of this century, according to a new study that found efforts to reduce emissions are helping. Oh, they're helping. What are we doing, by the way? Well, the article explains the reason for the sudden good news is because models and scenarios used to make the predictions are getting old, with most developed more than a decade ago. But of course, even more important is that a study reveals the models don't use real data. A new study suggests that climate research and policy are currently overly focused on implausibly pessimistic scenarios. Study lead Roger Pelk Jr. says, it is notable that the vast majority of scenarios that project futures up to 2100 failed our simple criteria of plausibility by 2020, even though they were developed in recent years and decades. So they didn't even get 2020 right. There's a need for these scenarios to be updated more frequently. Oh, the science evolved. Researchers may be using a 2005 scenario, but we need a 2022 perspective. So they're using computer models that are almost 20 years old. If you ever played a video game and looked at how simplistic the computing power required is for a game that's 20 years old, I mean, even things like setting broken bones has gotten vastly more technical and improved a great deal over the course of 20 years. So they're using out-of-date scenarios, but it hits those narrative goals, so why would you update it? It's doing what you want. In fact, it was big oil that coined the term carbon footprints, and yet environmentalists love to talk about this. It turns out that the concept of the carbon footprint, that popular measure of personal impact, was the brainchild of an advertising firm working for British Petroleum. British Petroleum, the second largest non-state-owned oil company in the world with 18,700 gas and service stations, hired the public relations professionals to promote the slant that climate change is not the fault of an oil giant, but individuals. It was here BP first promoted successfully the term carbon footprint, and the company unveiled a carbon footprint calculator in 2004. Of course, if you're trying to break down the world into districts, much like the Hunger Games, and limit the ability of people to travel based on some sort of social credit carbon system, it would be a pretty good tool for great resetters to use as well, but that's fantasy. The other useful thing is don't listen to what they say, listen to what they do. Of course, Joe Biden, the champion of all things far left and woke, because he doesn't know what's going on, so his handlers are. Biden is opening more public land to oil and gas drilling in latest climate policy capitulation. Why? Because as Obama recently noted, his presidential approval rating, but in general, tracks perfectly with the price of oil. Not anything else they do, not war, not handouts, not, student loan or whatever, any other thing. It's the price of gas, which tracks well with the statement, it's the economy, stupid, and the price of gasoline is a pretty good proxy for how the economy is doing. So it's interesting. What I'm interested in seeing is we hear all this doom and gloom and end of the world stuff. But now that you have the Democrats, it's basically a foregone conclusion that it's going to be a total wipeout here in November. And Biden is down in the 30s somewhere in approval. They're going to have to go do some soul searching and reinvent at least their rhetoric, if not their party. And they're going to have to turn on these environmentalists. They've got to get the price of gas down. They've got to be on the side of working Americans or they're never going to win again. And environmental activists are already slamming Biden for his recklessness for abdicating climate leadership. Randy Spivak, director of public lands for Center of Biological Diversity, says, quote, the Biden administration's claim that it must hold these lease sales is pure fiction and a reckless failure of climate leadership. It's as if they're ignoring the horror of firestorms, floods, and mega droughts and accepting climate catastrophes as business as usual. Oh my. Well, with that horrifying set of forecasts, I guess I'm going to go outside and do some yard work and maybe go for a walk before the entire earth catches on fire.